I pressed my fingers against my lower back, trying to ease the persistent ache that had become my constant companion over the past 8 months. The polished marble floors of the Meridian Club gleamed under the crystal chandeliers, their cold elegance a stark contrast to the sensible black flats I wore as part of my server uniform. Each step sent a dull throb through my swollen ankles, hidden beneath the regulation black pantyhose that had become increasingly uncomfortable as my pregnancy progressed. The scent of expensive cologne mingled with the aroma of aged whiskey and leather from the private booths, creating an atmosphere of masculine power that had once intimidated me. Now it simply reminded me of how far I'd fallen from the world I'd once inhabited. The weight of the silver tray in my hands seemed heavier than usual today, loaded with crystal glasses and premium liquor, destined for the club's most exclusive members. Table 12 needs their usual, Marcus, the floor supervisor, called out with his customary impatience. His sharp gray eyes always seemed to find fault, always carried the implication that I wasn't moving fast enough, wasn't earning my keep. The Salvatore party. And don't keep them waiting, Sophia. These aren't the kind of clients who appreciate delays. My stomach clenched at the name, but I nodded silently. Salvatore was common enough in this city. It couldn't be him. Not after 2 years of careful distance, of building this new life in the shadows where powerful men didn't think to look for discarded mistresses. I'd chosen this job specifically for its anonymity. Wealthy men rarely noticed the women who served them, especially when those women wore shapeless uniforms and kept their eyes downcast. The tray felt impossibly heavy as I made my way across the dining room, weaving between tables occupied by titans of industry and their associates. Conversations about mergers and acquisitions, political maneuvering, and offshore investments created a low hum of privileged discourse. These men moved billions with handshake agreements while I struggled to make rent on my studio apartment 3 neighborhoods away. My reflection caught in the mirrored wall panels that lined the corridor to the private dining area. 8 months pregnant, face fuller than it had been, hair pulled back in a simple ponytail instead of the elaborate styles I'd once favored. I looked like exactly what I was trying to be: invisible, forgettable, beneath notice. The black maternity uniform dress hung loose around my frame, designed to conceal rather than flatter. Table 12 occupied a corner booth in the most secluded section of the club, partially hidden by a carved wooden partition that afforded both privacy and a commanding view of the entire dining room. The leather banquette could seat 6 comfortably, though I could see only 2 figures as I approached, their backs to me as they leaned over documents spread across the mahogany table. "Gentlemen," I began, setting down the tray with practiced efficiency. "Your usual selection of—" The words died in my throat as one of the men turned toward me. Dark eyes that had haunted my dreams for 2 years met mine with immediate recognition. Nathan Salvatore looked exactly as I remembered. Devastatingly handsome, impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit that emphasized his broad shoulders, his black hair perfectly styled despite the late hour. But it was his expression that made my blood run cold. No surprise, no shock of unexpected recognition. Just a slow, satisfied smile that told me this encounter was anything but accidental. "Hello, Isabella," he said quietly, using the name only he had ever called me. His voice carried the same dangerous velvet quality that had once made me weak with desire. "You look well. Pregnancy suits you." My hands trembled as I tried to maintain my grip on the empty tray. The other man at the table, someone I didn't recognize with graying temples and calculating eyes, watched our exchange with obvious interest. This was a performance, I realized with growing horror. A demonstration. "I think there's been a mistake," I managed, forcing my voice to remain steady. "I'm sorry, but I don't know what you're talking about. If you'll excuse me—" Nathan's hand closed around my wrist as I turned to leave, his grip gentle but unmistakably firm. The touch sent electricity up my arm, muscle memory betraying me with unwanted recognition. "Sit down, Isabella. We have catching up to do. I have other tables to serve, I protested, acutely aware of Marcus's eyes on me from across the room, of the way several other servers had paused in their duties to observe the unusual scene. My supervisor is well compensated for his flexibility tonight, Nathan finished smoothly, as is the club management. We won't be disturbed. He gestured to the empty space beside him in the booth. Please. It wasn't really a request. Nothing with Nathan Salvatore ever was, despite the polite phrasing. I slid awkwardly into the booth, hyper-aware of how the pregnancy made the movement ungraceful, of how out of place I looked in this setting that had once been my natural habitat. The leather was buttery soft beneath me, luxurious in a way my current life no longer included. Allow me to introduce my associate, Nathan continued as if this were a perfectly normal business meeting. Vincent Torino. Vincent, this is Isabella, the woman I've been telling you about. Vincent nodded with the respect due to someone who clearly held significance in Nathan's world. A pleasure, he said, though his eyes held the predatory assessment of a man evaluating valuable property. Nathan speaks of you often. My chest tightened with panic and something else I didn't want to acknowledge. He'd been talking about me. After 2 years of silence, 2 years of building a life where Nathan Salvatore was nothing but a painful memory, he'd been discussing me with his business associates like unfinished business. How did you find me? The question escaped before I could stop it, revealing too much vulnerability, too much fear. Nathan's smile deepened, and I saw a flash of the predator that lurked beneath his polished exterior. Did you really think you could disappear from me, Bella? That I wouldn't know exactly where you were, what you were doing, how you were surviving? His fingers traced the back of my hand with familiar intimacy. I've known about this job since your 2nd week. Known about the apartment on Maple Street. Known about your weekly doctor's appointments with Dr. Sarah Chen. The blood drained from my face. All this time, I'd thought I was free, thought I'd successfully escaped his world and his influence. Instead, I'd been living in an elaborate cage, watched and monitored like a valuable pet that had momentarily slipped its leash. The baby, Vincent said with casual interest, as if discussing a business acquisition. When is she due? Nathan answered before I could speak. 6 weeks. Dr. Chen is optimistic about the delivery, given Isabella's excellent health. His thumb brushed across my knuckles, a gesture that looked affectionate but felt like a brand of ownership. We're very excited. We. The word hit me like a physical blow. There was no we. There hadn't been for 2 years, not since I'd discovered the true extent of Nathan's business interests, and fled in the middle of the night with nothing but the clothes on my back and the cash I'd managed to save. I need to get back to work, I said, starting to rise from the booth. The panic was building now, threatening to overwhelm the careful control I'd maintained for so long. Nathan's hand on my arm stopped me again, his touch deceptively gentle. You're done working here, Isabella. Tonight was your last shift at the Meridian Club. He reached into his jacket and withdrew an envelope, sliding it across the table toward me. 2 weeks' pay, plus a generous bonus. Your supervisor has already been informed. I stared at the envelope as if it contained a bomb. You can't just... Can't what? His voice carried a hint of steel beneath the silk. Take care of the mother of my child? Ensure she's not on her feet 12 hours a day, serving drinks to men who look at her like she's something they could buy for the right price? His eyes darkened with something that might have been genuine concern, or might have been possessiveness. You're carrying my daughter, Isabella. Did you really think I'd allow you to continue living like this? Vincent checked his watch, and stood with the fluid grace of a man accustomed to power. I'll leave you two to sort out the details, he said diplomatically. Nathan, we'll continue our discussion tomorrow. Congratulations on the upcoming addition to your family. The words felt like a death sentence. Family. As if the life growing inside me had somehow re-established bonds I'd thought were permanently severed. as if biology trumped choice, trumped freedom, trumped the very real reasons I'd risked everything to escape Nathan's world in the first place. After Vincent left, the silence stretched between us, heavy with unspoken history and unresolved tension. Nathan studied my face with the intensity that had once made me feel like the most important person in his universe. Now it felt like being examined by a collector appraising a piece of art that had temporarily gone missing. "You look tired," he said finally, his voice softer now, almost tender. "Thin, despite the pregnancy. When was the last time you had a proper meal? Real medical care beyond the basic prenatal visits?" I wanted to lie, wanted to project strength and independence, but the exhaustion I'd been fighting for months weighed down my words. "I'm managing fine." "Are you?" His fingers traced the dark circles I knew were prominent under my eyes, despite my attempts to conceal them with makeup. "Because from where I sit, it looks like you're barely surviving, living in a studio apartment with broken heating, working a job that barely pays rent, let alone what you need for the baby." The accuracy of his assessment was devastating. He did know everything, not just the surface details of my life, but the grinding reality of it. The nights I'd lain awake worrying about hospital bills and cribs and 1,000 other expenses I couldn't afford. The morning sickness that had cost me my first job because I couldn't afford to miss shifts. The constant gnawing fear that I wasn't strong enough to do this alone. "What do you want, Nathan?" The question came out more defeated than I'd intended. His smile was gentle now, almost sad. "What I've always wanted, Bella. You. Home where you belong, where you're safe, where our daughter can grow up with everything she needs." He leaned closer, his voice dropping to the intimate whisper I remembered too well. "I want to take care of you both, like I should have been doing all along." The offer hung between us like a gilded trap. Safety, security, luxury. Everything I'd given up when I'd chosen principle over comfort. Everything I'd been desperately missing during the long, lonely months of pregnancy and poverty. But wrapped up with those temptations was everything I'd feared about Nathan's world. The violence, the moral compromises, the way he looked at me like something he owned rather than someone he loved. "And if I say no?" I asked, though we both knew it wasn't really a question. Nathan's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes, a hardening that reminded me exactly why I'd been so afraid to stay. "You're carrying my daughter, Isabella, my blood. Do you really think I'm going to let you raise her in poverty, surrounded by danger, when I have the power to give her everything?" His hand moved to rest gently on my rounded belly, possessive and protective in equal measure. "She's a Salvatore. It's time she lived like one." The black sedan waited outside the Meridian Club like a sleeping predator, its tinted windows reflecting the amber glow of the street lamps. I recognized it immediately, the same model Nathan had always preferred, armor-plated and bulletproof, a rolling fortress that had once made me feel untouchable. Now it felt like a hearse. "Just to your apartment," Nathan said as he guided me toward the vehicle with a hand at the small of my back. "To collect your things. You won't be going back there." The driver held the door open with practiced deference. Marcus, I realized with a start, not the floor supervisor from the club, but Nathan's longtime bodyguard and driver. The man who had once taught me to shoot, who had accompanied us to charity galas and business dinners, who had vanished from my life along with everything else when I'd made my desperate escape 2 years ago. "Miss Isabella," Marcus said with genuine warmth, his weathered face creasing into a smile. "It's good to see you again. You look beautiful." The kindness in his voice nearly undid me. During my time with Nathan, Marcus had been like a protective uncle, one of the few people in that dangerous world who had seemed to care about me as more than just the boss's woman. Seeing him again brought back a flood of memories I'd tried so hard to suppress. "Hello, Marcus," I managed, accepting his help into the car's leather interior. The familiar scent of expensive cologne and leather enveloped me, triggering muscle memory of countless rides in vehicles just like this one. Nathan slid in beside me, close enough that I could feel the heat radiating from his body. As we pulled away from the club, I watched my old life disappear through the tinted windows. The other servers would gossip about this for weeks. Sophia, the pregnant server, whisked away by mysterious men in expensive suits. They'd create elaborate theories about who I really was, never suspecting the truth was both simpler and more complicated than anything they could imagine. "You've been watching me," I said, as the city lights blurred past. "For how long?" Nathan's profile was sharp against the window, all clean lines and controlled power. "Since the day you left." His voice carried no apology, no shame. "Did you think I would just let you vanish? That I wouldn't move heaven and earth to find you? I thought you'd respect my choice to leave." He turned then, and the intensity in his dark eyes made my breath catch. "Your choice was based on incomplete information. Fear, misunderstanding about what I am, what we could be together." His hand found mine in the darkness between us. "You ran before we could talk, before I could explain." "Explain what?" The words came out sharper than I'd intended. That the man I thought I loved was a criminal, that every beautiful moment we shared was built on blood money and violence. Nathan's jaw tightened, but his voice remained carefully controlled. "Explain that everything I've ever done has been to build something better, to create a legacy that means more than just power and fear." He gestured toward the window, toward the city sprawling around us. "Half the legitimate businesses in this city exist because I provided initial funding when banks wouldn't. The Salvatore Foundation has put thousands of kids through college, funded medical research, rebuilt entire neighborhoods. Built on the backs of illegal activities," I countered, though the conviction in my voice wavered. I'd seen the foundation's work during our time together, had even helped coordinate some of their charitable initiatives. The good they'd accomplished was real, undeniable. "Every fortune in this city started with morally ambiguous decisions," Nathan said quietly. "The difference is that I'm honest about what I am, what it takes to survive and thrive in a world where the law is just another weapon for the powerful to use against the weak." The car glided through streets I'd walked countless times over the past 2 years, but seeing them from this perspective made them look different somehow, smaller, more fragile. We passed the diner where I'd eaten countless solitary meals, the laundromat where I'd spent hours with a book and a bag of quarters, the bus stop where I'd waited in rain and snow for transportation I could afford. "Your building manager," Nathan said conversationally as we turned onto Maple Street. "Robert Hendricks. Did you know he has a gambling problem? Owes approximately $47,000 to some very unfriendly people?" My blood went cold. "What does that have to do with anything?" "Nothing, directly. Except that 3 weeks ago, those unfriendly people approached him about settling his debt through alternative means, specifically information about his tenants, their schedules, their vulnerabilities, their potential value." The building came into view, a tired brick structure with peeling paint and broken security cameras that had never worked in the time I'd lived there. Suddenly, its shortcomings felt less like minor inconveniences and more like fatal flaws. "You're lying," I said, but my voice lacked conviction. Nathan pulled out his phone, swiping to a photograph that made my stomach drop. Robert Hendricks shaking hands with a man I didn't recognize outside a seedy bar downtown, an envelope changing hands between them. Taken 4 days ago, the envelope contained $5,000 and a detailed breakdown of your daily routine. The world tilted around me. All this time, I'd thought I was hiding in plain sight, thought I was safe in my anonymity. Instead, I'd been a sitting duck, marked and tracked by people who saw my pregnancy not as a blessing but as leverage. "Who are they?" I whispered. "Does it matter?" Nathan's voice was gentle but implacable. What matters is that they know where you live, where you work, when you're most vulnerable. They know you're carrying my child, and they know exactly how much that child is worth to me. Marcus pulled up in front of my building, but made no move to get out. Through the windshield, I could see the familiar lobby with its flickering fluorescent lights and broken mailboxes. It had never looked like much, but it had been mine. The first place I'd ever lived that Nathan Salvatore's money hadn't touched. The apartment on the 3rd floor, Nathan continued, consulting his phone again. Mrs. Chen, no relation to your doctor, moved out 3 days ago. Very suddenly, according to other tenants. Left most of her belongings behind. He showed me another photograph, this one of a slight Asian woman hurrying away from the building with a single suitcase. She received a visit from the same men who've been paying Robert for information. My hands were shaking now, the full scope of my vulnerability becoming clear. I'd been so focused on hiding from Nathan that I'd never considered I might be making myself a target for his enemies. In trying to protect my child from his world, I'd exposed us both to far worse dangers. The family in 2B with the twin toddlers, Nathan said relentlessly. They've been asking questions about you, where you work, whether you have family in the city, if you ever have male visitors. His eyes met mine in the dim light. They moved in 2 weeks after you did, Isabella. Convenient timing for a young couple to find an affordable apartment in this neighborhood. Each revelation was like a physical blow. My safe haven had been compromised from the beginning, turned into a surveillance operation with me as the unwitting star. Every friendly conversation with neighbors, every routine interaction, had been intelligence gathering. Why? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to hear the answer. Because you disappeared with something that belonged to me, Nathan said simply. Something I would pay any price to recover. His hand moved to my belly again, possessive and protective. My daughter. My future. Men like Vincent Torino understand the value of leverage, and pregnant women make excellent hostages. The name hit me like ice water. Vincent Torino, the man from the club, who had watched our reunion with calculating eyes. Not just a business associate then, but something more dangerous. He's not your friend, I said, understanding flooding through me. Nathan's smile was sharp and cold. Vincent represents certain business interests that would prefer to see the Salvatore organization restructured, with me removed from leadership and my assets distributed among more cooperative parties. He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. Your sudden reappearance tonight wasn't coincidental, Bella. It was a demonstration. Proof that I could be reached, that my weaknesses could be exploited. The car felt smaller suddenly, the leather seats pressing in around me like a trap. You used me as bait. I used the situation to my advantage, Nathan corrected. Vincent's people have been closing in for months, testing my defenses, looking for pressure points. When they discovered your existence, your pregnancy, they thought they'd found the perfect weapon. His fingers traced my cheek with infinite gentleness. They were right, of course. You are my greatest weakness. But they made the mistake of thinking that made you theirs to use. Through the car windows, I could see lights in apartment windows, people living their quiet, ordinary lives. 24 hours ago, I'd been one of them, worried about rent and doctor's bills and whether I could afford a proper crib. Now I was sitting in an armored car, learning that my existence had become a chess piece in a game I didn't understand. So, what happens now? I asked, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. Nathan's expression softened, the dangerous predator replaced momentarily by something that might have been genuine affection. Now you come home, where you belong, where I can protect you and our daughter from people who would use you to hurt me. He gestured toward the building. 5 minutes to collect whatever you can't live without. Clothes, personal items, anything that matters to you. Everything else can be replaced. And if I refuse? The question hung in the air between us, heavy with implications. Nathan studied my face for a long moment, and I saw the exact instant when he decided to abandon any pretense of giving me a choice. "Vincent's people are watching this building right now," he said quietly. "They're waiting to see whether you'll be leaving with me or whether they'll need to implement alternative plans for securing their leverage." He pulled out his phone again, showing me a live feed from what appeared to be a surveillance camera. The van across the street, the man in the coffee shop on the corner who's been nursing the same cup for 3 hours, the woman pushing a stroller who's made 4 trips around the block. Each image was a nail in the coffin of my independence. They were everywhere. A web of watchers I'd never noticed, never suspected. My safety, my freedom, my very existence had been an illusion for longer than I cared to consider. "Marcus will escort you upstairs," Nathan continued. "You have 5 minutes to gather what you need. After that, we're leaving, and you're never coming back to this place." His hand found mine again, squeezing gently. "I'm sorry it has to be this way, Isabella, but I won't lose you again, and I won't let anyone use our daughter as a weapon against me." The certainty in his voice left no room for argument, no space for negotiation. This wasn't a request or even a demand. It was simply a statement of fact. In 5 minutes, my old life would cease to exist, and I would step back into a world I'd thought I'd escaped forever. As Marcus opened the car door and offered his hand to help me out, I realized with crystalline clarity that my months of freedom had been nothing more than an intermission. The real performance was just beginning. The apartment looked smaller than I remembered, shabbier in the harsh fluorescent light that buzzed overhead with electrical problems I'd never been able to afford to fix. Marcus stood by the door, his presence both comforting and ominous as I moved through the cramped space that had been my entire world for 2 years. 5 minutes. The deadline ticked in my head like a bomb as I pulled my battered suitcase from beneath the twin bed that served as both sleeping space and couch. What did you pack when your life was being dismantled? What mementos were worth carrying from one prison to another? My hands moved automatically, gathering the few decent maternity clothes I owned, the prenatal vitamins I'd splurged on despite the cost, the small wooden jewelry box that held the only valuable thing I'd kept from my previous life, my grandmother's pearl earrings. Everything else felt suddenly insignificant, the accumulated possessions of a woman who'd been playing at independence while remaining fundamentally powerless. "Miss Isabella?" Marcus said gently, his weathered face kind in the harsh light. "He's not the same man you left." I looked up from the suitcase, surprised by the unsolicited comment. Marcus had never been one for small talk, had always maintained the professional distance appropriate for his position. "What do you mean?" "After you disappeared." Marcus paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "It nearly destroyed him. Not the business. That kept running because it had to. But Nathan himself. He became someone I didn't recognize, colder, more ruthless, like he'd cut out the part of himself that made him human. The revelation shouldn't have affected me, shouldn't have mattered after everything I'd learned about Nathan's world, everything I'd run from. But something deep in my chest tightened at the image of him suffering, even if that suffering had been a consequence of his own choices. "He brought it on himself," I said, folding a sweater with unnecessary care. "I didn't ask for his world to follow me. I just wanted out." "Did you?" Marcus asked quietly. "Or did you want him to come after you?" The question hit like a physical blow, forcing me to confront a truth I'd buried so deep I'd almost convinced myself it wasn't real. In the darkest moments over the past 2 years, when I'd lain awake in this narrow bed, one hand on my growing belly, wondering if I'd made a terrible mistake, hadn't there been a small, treacherous part of me that hoped Nathan would find me? That he would prove he loved me enough to move mountains to bring me home? "It doesn't matter what I wanted," I said finally. "This isn't about choice anymore. It's about survival. Marcus nodded, understanding more than I'd said aloud. He's changed since we found you, since he learned about the baby, that cold man from the past 2 years. He's starting to thaw. He moved closer, lowering his voice. But he's also more dangerous now, more protective, more willing to do whatever it takes to keep what's his. Before I could respond, the sound of footsteps on the stairs made us both freeze. Not Nathan's confident stride, but something lighter, more hurried. A woman's voice called out in the hallway, muffled but urgent. "Isabella, are you up there? I saw the car outside." Elena. My stomach dropped as I recognized my friend's voice. The only person from my new life who had shown me genuine kindness without expecting anything in return. Elena from the diner where I sometimes grabbed coffee, who had brought me soup when I'd been too sick with morning sickness to work, who had insisted on driving me to prenatal appointments when the bus routes were too complicated. Marcus was already moving toward the door, his hand inside his jacket where I knew he kept his weapon. The protective instinct that had once made me feel safe now filled me with terror for someone I cared about. "She's just a friend," I said quickly, grabbing his arm. "She works at Rosie's diner. She's harmless." "No one is harmless right now," Marcus replied grimly. But he stepped back from the door at my touch. "Answer her. Act normal. Don't let her come up here." I moved to the window that faced the street, pushing aside the thin curtains to look down at the sidewalk. Elena stood near the building's entrance, her red hair bright under the streetlights, looking up at my window with obvious concern. Behind her, I could now see what Nathan had shown me in the car, the van with tinted windows, the solitary figure in the coffee shop, the woman with the stroller who was lurking in the shadows between streetlights. "Elena," I called down, forcing my voice to sound casual. "I'm fine, just moving some things around." She looked up, relief visible on her face even from this distance. I was worried when I saw the fancy car. Thought maybe something had happened. She paused, studying my face in the window. "You look pale. Are you feeling all right?" Before I could answer, another figure emerged from the building's entrance. Nathan stepped into the circle of streetlight, and I watched Elena's expression change from concern to confusion to something approaching fear. Even at this distance, even in casual clothes, Nathan radiated an authority that made ordinary people instinctively step back. "Friend of yours?" he asked Elena, his voice carrying clearly in the still night air. The politeness in his tone didn't mask the underlying threat. Elena looked between Nathan and my window, her journalistic instincts clearly kicking in. She'd never asked too many questions about my past, but she was smart enough to recognize when a situation was more complicated than it appeared. "Isabella," she called up again, her voice firmer now. "Is everything okay? Do you need help?" The question hung in the air like a lifeline thrown to a drowning woman. This was my chance, possibly my last chance, to choose a different path, to scream for help, to cause a scene, to force this confrontation into the open where Nathan couldn't control every variable. But as I opened my mouth to respond, I caught sight of the watchers in their various positions around the street. Vincent Torino's people, waiting to see how this scenario would play out. If I screamed, if I brought the police, if I created the kind of public spectacle that Nathan couldn't quietly contain, what would happen to Elena? To the innocent bystanders who would inevitably be caught in the crossfire? "I'm fine," I called down, hating the way my voice shook. It's complicated, Elena, but I'm safe." Nathan looked up at my window then, and even from this distance, I could see the approval in his expression. The knowledge that I was protecting my friend, making the calculation he'd known I would make. Choosing the lesser evil because the greater one was too terrible to contemplate. "You should go home," Nathan told Elena, his voice kind but implacable. "Isabella is in good hands now." Elena hesitated for another moment, clearly torn between her protective instincts and her growing awareness that she was out of her depth. Finally, she nodded, but not before calling up one last time. "You have my number," she said. "If you need anything at all, you call me. Promise?" "I promise," I lied, knowing I would never see her again, never drag her into the dangerous world I was about to re-enter. As Elena disappeared into the night, I turned away from the window to find Marcus watching me with something that might have been sympathy. "You did the right thing," he said quietly. "Did I?" The suitcase felt impossibly heavy as I zipped it closed. Or did I just prove that I'm still the same woman who can be controlled through other people's safety? Marcus didn't answer, but his silence was answer enough. That was exactly what I'd proven. To Nathan, to myself, to the watchers who would report back to Vincent Torino that Nathan Salvatore's woman was still his greatest weakness, still willing to sacrifice her own freedom to protect the innocent. The walk down 3 flights of stairs felt like a funeral procession. Each step took me further from the independence I'd fought so hard to build, closer to a world where my choices were illusions, and my safety came at the cost of my freedom. The building that had been my refuge now felt like a mausoleum, holding the ghost of the woman I'd tried to become. Nathan was waiting by the car when we emerged, his expression unreadable in the streetlight. He took my suitcase without a word, passing it to Marcus before helping me into the back seat, with a gentleness that felt more threatening than any show of force. "Where are we going?" I asked, as the car pulled away from the curb, carrying me away from the last remnants of my independent life. "Home," Nathan said simply, settling beside me in the leather seat that smelled of expensive cologne and old money. "The penthouse has been updated since you left. I think you'll find it more comfortable now." The penthouse. I closed my eyes, remembering the sprawling apartment that had once felt like a palace, and later like a gilded cage. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, marble floors that echoed with every footstep, rooms filled with beautiful things that I'd been afraid to touch because they represented wealth built on blood. "I can't go back there," I said, the words barely audible. "Not to that place." Nathan's hand found mine in the darkness, his fingers intertwining with mine in a gesture that was both comforting and possessive. "It's different now, softer. I had it redesigned after you left, tried to make it into the kind of place you could be happy." The admission was quietly devastating. While I'd been learning to live without him, he'd been changing his world to accommodate a ghost, preparing for a return I'd sworn would never happen. The effort behind that revelation, the hope it represented, made my chest tight with emotions I didn't want to examine. "Nathan," I began, not sure what I wanted to say. "I know you're afraid," he interrupted softly. "I know you think I'm a monster, that everything about my world is built on violence and corruption, and maybe you're right about some of it." His thumb traced across my knuckles, a gesture so familiar it made my heart ache. "But I need you to understand something, Isabella. Everything I've ever done, every choice I've made, has been about building something permanent, something that lasts." Through the tinted windows, I watched the city transform as we moved from my shabby neighborhood toward the gleaming towers of downtown. Each mile took us higher up the economic ladder, from cramped apartments and corner stores to boutiques and restaurants I'd once known by name. "The foundation work you helped me with," Nathan continued, his voice taking on an earnestness I remembered from our quiet moments together. "That wasn't for show. That wasn't about public relations or money laundering. That was about creating something good from the chaos, something clean from the dirty money." I wanted to argue, wanted to maintain the moral clarity that had driven my escape 2 years ago. But sitting in this car, feeling the weight of everything that had just transpired, the absolutes seemed less absolute. The world was more complicated than I'd wanted to believe, painted in shades of gray that made simple judgments impossible. "And the violence?" I asked. "The threats? The people who get hurt when your business interests conflict with theirs?" Nathan was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice carried a weight I'd never heard before. "Do you think the men who run the banks, the corporations, the government are any less violent? They just use lawyers and regulations instead of guns. They destroy lives with paperwork instead of bullets." He turned to face me fully. "At least I'm honest about what I am." The car slowed as we approached the familiar building where I'd once lived, its glass and steel facade rising like a monument to wealth and power. The doorman who had once greeted me by name was gone, replaced by someone younger, more alert, whose eyes swept the street with professional wariness before nodding to Marcus. "I won't be your prisoner," I said, as the car stopped, making one last attempt to establish some boundary, some small measure of control over my own life. Nathan's smile was gentle but unyielding. "You'll be my partner, the mother of my child, the woman I—" He paused, seeming to struggle with words that had once come easily. "The woman I can't live without." The admission hung between us as the car door opened, revealing the marble lobby that had once felt like home and now felt like a beautiful prison. As Nathan helped me from the car, his hand protective on my arm, I realized with crystalline clarity that this wasn't really about choice anymore. It was about survival. Mine, his, and the innocent life growing inside me that had somehow become the center of a dangerous game I'd never wanted to play. The elevator ride to the penthouse felt endless, each floor that ticked by marking another step away from the woman I'd tried to become, and back toward the one I'd been. Nathan stood beside me in the mirrored walls, his presence both familiar and strange after 2 years of absence. In the harsh elevator lighting, I could see subtle changes in his face, new lines around his eyes, a hardness to his jaw that hadn't been there before. The doors opened with a soft chime, revealing the foyer that had once been my daily reality. But Nathan had been right. Everything was different. Gone were the stark black and white marble floors, the intimidating modern art that had made me feel like an intruder in a museum. Instead, warm hardwood gleamed under soft lighting, and the walls were painted in cream tones that felt welcoming rather than cold. "The nursery is ready," Nathan said quietly as he guided me through the transformed space. "But I wanted you to see it before making any final decisions. Nothing has to stay if you don't like it." We passed the living room where I'd once spent countless evenings reading while Nathan worked, but even that space had been softened. The leather furniture remained, but it was now accented with throws in warm colors, and fresh flowers filled crystal vases on every surface. It looked like a home rather than a showplace, but it was the nursery that made my breath catch in my throat. The room that had once been Nathan's study was now a vision in soft yellow and white, with hand-painted murals of clouds and stars covering the walls. A rocking chair sat by the window overlooking the city, positioned to catch the morning light. The crib was carved from what looked like cherry wood, its delicate spindles and curved lines speaking of craftsmanship that would have cost more than I'd made in 6 months at the club. "It's beautiful," I whispered, unable to keep the awe from my voice. Nathan moved to stand behind me, his hands settling gently on my shoulders. "I started working on it the day after I found out you were pregnant. Every detail, every color choice. I kept thinking about what you would want for her." The intimacy of the admission was devastating. While I'd been struggling to afford basic prenatal care, he'd been creating this perfect sanctuary, this testament to a future he'd envisioned for us. The rocking chair looked worn, as if someone had spent countless hours in it, and I realized with a shock that Nathan himself might have sat there, planning and dreaming about a daughter he'd never met. "How long have you known?" I asked, my voice barely audible. "About the pregnancy? Since your 2nd trimester? About the fact that she's mine?" His hands tightened slightly on my shoulders. "I had my suspicions from the beginning, but I was certain the day you fainted at work and had to be taken to the emergency room. I spun around to face him, shocked by this revelation. "You knew about that?" Nathan's expression was carefully controlled, but I could see the pain beneath the surface. "Did you think I would let the mother of my child collapse from exhaustion without ensuring she received proper care? The hospital bill that mysteriously disappeared. The follow-up appointments that were suddenly covered by your insurance." He touched my cheek gently. "I've been taking care of you both, even when you didn't know it." The knowledge hit me like a physical blow. All those times I'd panicked about medical expenses, all the nights I'd lain awake worrying about how I'd afford the care my baby needed. He'd been there, invisible but constant, ensuring I had what I needed while allowing me to maintain the illusion of independence. "Why didn't you approach me then?" I asked. "Why wait until now?" Nathan moved to the window, looking out over the city that sprawled below us like a kingdom he ruled. "Because I thought, hoped, that you would come back on your own. That when you realized how difficult it was to raise a child alone, you would remember what we had together and choose to come home." The honesty in his voice was almost unbearable. "And when I didn't? When Vincent Torino's people started asking questions about my personal life, when they discovered your existence and began making plans." He turned back to me, and the dangerous edge was back in his eyes. "I realized that allowing you to maintain your independence was putting you both in danger, that my enemies would use my greatest weakness against me." A soft knock at the nursery door interrupted us, and Marcus appeared with a woman I didn't recognize. She was perhaps 60, with steel-gray hair pulled back in an elegant chignon and kind eyes that assessed me with professional interest. "Mrs. Castellano," Nathan said. "This is Isabella. Isabella, Elena Castellano will be helping to coordinate your care and the baby's needs." Mrs. Castellano stepped forward with a warm smile. "It's lovely to meet you, dear. Mr. Salvatore has told me so much about you." Her accent carried hints of Italy, and her demeanor radiated the kind of maternal authority that made me want to trust her instantly. "I've prepared a light meal if you're hungry, and Dr. Chen will be here in the morning for a full examination." "Dr. Chen?" I asked, surprised. "How did you—" "Your medical records were transferred this afternoon," Nathan said smoothly, "along with all her recommendations for your remaining weeks of pregnancy. She'll be providing your care from now on, here in the penthouse. No more waiting rooms, no more crowded clinics." The casual way he'd rearranged my medical care, the assumption that he could simply transfer my life from one place to another like moving furniture, should have outraged me. Instead, I felt a treacherous sense of relief. The thought of not having to navigate public transportation to prenatal appointments, of not having to sit in uncomfortable plastic chairs for hours while trying to hide my growing anxiety about costs. "I should be angry," I said, voicing the thought aloud. "Should you?" Nathan asked. "Or should you be relieved that you don't have to carry this burden alone anymore?" Mrs. Castellano cleared her throat diplomatically. "Perhaps we should let Isabella rest and settle in. It's been a long evening." She turned to me with motherly concern. "Your room is ready whenever you'd like to see it. I took the liberty of having some immediate necessities delivered, but we can arrange for anything else you need." My room. The assumption that I would be staying, that this was now my home again, hung unspoken in the air. But as I looked around the nursery, at the evidence of Nathan's preparations, at the care and thought that had gone into every detail, I realized that my capitulation had been inevitable from the moment he'd walked back into my life. "I'd like to see it," I said quietly. Nathan led me down the hall to what had once been the guest suite, but like everything else, it had been transformed. The room was decorated in soft blues and whites, with a king-sized bed, covered in what looked like Egyptian cotton, and a sitting area by the windows where I could watch the city lights. French doors opened onto a small balcony that I remembered overlooking the building's private garden. "Your things from the apartment will be here tomorrow," Nathan said, standing in the doorway as if unsure whether he was welcome in the space. But Mrs. Castellano stocked the closet with essentials: maternity clothes, sleepwear, whatever you might need immediately. I moved to the closet and found it filled with beautiful, expensive maternity wear in my exact size. Soft cashmere sweaters, silk blouses, designer jeans that would actually fit my changing body. Everything I'd been unable to afford. Everything I'd told myself didn't matter when I was focused purely on survival. "This must have cost a fortune," I said, running my fingers over a particularly beautiful dress. "Money isn't real when you have enough of it," Nathan replied. "It's just a tool, a way to solve problems and remove obstacles." He moved closer, his voice dropping to the intimate tone I remembered too well. "I want to remove every obstacle between you and happiness, Isabella. Every worry, every fear, every moment of uncertainty about the future." I turned to face him, and the expression on his face made my chest tight with emotions I'd tried so hard to suppress. This wasn't the cold, calculating criminal I'd built up in my mind during our separation. This was the man who had once made me feel like the most important person in his universe, who had listened to my dreams and made them reality, who had held me through nightmares and celebrated every small victory in my life. "And in return?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "In return, you stay. You let me protect you and our daughter. You build a life here, with me, and stop running from what we could have together." He reached out to touch my face, his fingers tracing the line of my cheek with infinite gentleness. "I'm not asking you to love me again, Isabella. I know I have to earn that back. I'm just asking you to let me try." The sincerity in his voice, the vulnerability he was allowing me to see, was more powerful than any threat or demonstration of force could have been. This was Nathan stripped of his armor, admitting that he needed me as much as I'd once needed him. "What about your business?" I asked. "The danger? Vincent Torino and his people?" Nathan's expression hardened slightly, the predator flickering beneath the surface. "Vincent made a mistake when he decided to use you as leverage against me. He'll discover that some lines shouldn't be crossed." His hand moved to rest on my belly, protective and possessive. "By tomorrow night, his organization will no longer be a threat to anyone." The casual way he spoke about what I knew would be violence, possibly death, should have terrified me. Instead, I felt a dark sense of satisfaction. These people had threatened my child, had turned my pregnancy into a weapon to be used against the man I'd once loved. Whatever Nathan had planned for them, they'd brought it on themselves. "And after that?" I pressed. "Will there be another Vincent Torino? Another threat we'll have to deal with?" Nathan was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice carried a weight I'd never heard before. "I've been thinking about stepping back. Not from everything, the legitimate businesses, the foundation work, but from the parts of my life that put you and our daughter at risk." He met my eyes directly. "I want to be the kind of father she can be proud of. The kind of man you fell in love with before you learned to be afraid of what I am." The admission was stunning in its implications. Nathan Salvatore didn't step back from anything, didn't show weakness or compromise his position for anyone. The fact that he was even considering it, for me, for our unborn daughter. "That's not a decision you should make lightly," I said carefully. "Your world doesn't exactly offer comfortable retirement plans." Nathan's smile was sharp and dangerous. "Let me worry about my world, Bella. Your only concern should be taking care of yourself and our daughter." He leaned down to press a gentle kiss to my forehead, the gesture so familiar it made my heart ache. "Rest now. Tomorrow we'll start building the life we should have had all along." As he moved toward the door, I called after him. "Nathan?" He turned back, hope flickering in his dark eyes. "Thank you," I said simply. "For the nursery, for taking care of the medical bills, for not giving up on us. The smile that spread across his face was radiant, transforming him from the dangerous man who commanded an empire back into the one who had once made me believe in fairy tales. I would never give up on you, Isabella. Never on us. After he left, I sank into the comfortable chair by the window and looked out over the city that stretched below like a sea of lights. Somewhere out there was the apartment I'd called home for 2 years, the diner where Elena still worked and worried about me, the life I'd built from nothing and had just abandoned without a backward glance. But as I placed my hand on my belly and felt our daughter move restlessly inside me, I realized that home had never been a place. It had been Nathan, and the future we'd dreamed of together before fear had driven me away. Tomorrow, that future would begin again. And despite everything, the danger, the moral compromises, the surrender of my hard-won independence, I found myself looking forward to it. I woke to the sound of my daughter's heartbeat amplified through Dr. Chen's ultrasound equipment, steady and strong in the morning light that streamed through the penthouse windows. 3 weeks had passed since Nathan had brought me home. 3 weeks of slowly settling into a routine that felt both foreign and familiar. Everything looks perfect, Dr. Chen said with genuine warmth, her professional demeanor softened by obvious affection for her patient. Blood pressure is excellent. Baby's measurements are right on track. You're practically glowing, Isabella. It was true. The constant exhaustion that had plagued me during my months of struggle had lifted, replaced by an energy I hadn't felt since early pregnancy. Regular meals prepared by Mrs. Castellano, prenatal vitamins that didn't represent a choice between medicine and groceries, and the absence of financial stress had transformed my health as dramatically as Nathan had transformed the penthouse. Any concerns? Dr. Chen asked as she completed her examination. I hesitated, then decided on honesty. I feel guilty for feeling so much better, like I'm betraying the woman who worked so hard to maintain her independence. Dr. Chen's expression grew thoughtful. Independence isn't about suffering, my dear. It's about having choices. And right now, you're choosing what's best for your daughter. She packed away her equipment with practiced efficiency. That baby is lucky to have a mother who's willing to make difficult decisions for her welfare. After Dr. Chen left, I found myself alone in the nursery again, a ritual that had become part of my daily routine. Nathan had given me complete freedom to modify anything I wanted, but I'd found little to change. The room was perfect, a testament to how well he still knew my tastes and preferences despite our years apart. She's active today, Mrs. Castellano observed, appearing in the doorway with a tray of herbal tea and the small sandwiches she'd taken to preparing for my mid-morning snack. Probably responding to all the excitement in the building. Excitement? Mrs. Castellano's expression grew carefully neutral. Mr. Salvatore has been unusually busy this week. Many meetings, many phone calls. Marco has been coordinating additional security measures. She set down the tray and busied herself adjusting the already perfect curtains. But nothing for you to worry about, dear. Your only job is to stay healthy and happy. The dismissal was gentle but firm, and I recognized the protective wall that Nathan's people had built around me. They were shielding me from whatever business was occupying his attention, maintaining the illusion that I could live in this beautiful space without being touched by the darker aspects of his world. But I wasn't naive. The increased security Mrs. Castellano had mentioned was visible even from my limited perspective. New faces among the building staff, additional cameras in the lobby, and the way Marcus now carried himself with heightened alertness all pointed to escalating tensions I wasn't supposed to understand. That evening, Nathan joined me for dinner in the smaller dining room that overlooked the garden. It had become our routine, a quiet meal together, where we talked about safe topics like the baby's development, the foundation's projects, books we'd both read. But tonight, tension radiated from him like heat, despite his efforts to appear relaxed. Vincent Torino, I said without preamble as Mrs. Castellano served the main course. What's happening with him? Nathan's fork paused halfway to his mouth, and I saw the exact moment he decided whether to continue protecting me from the truth or to trust me with it. Vincent made his move 3 days ago, an attempt to restructure certain business relationships in his favor. The euphemism didn't hide the underlying meaning. Someone died. Several someones, Nathan confirmed quietly, including 2 men who had been working for me for over a decade. His jaw tightened with barely controlled anger. Vincent seems to believe that creating a crisis will force me to negotiate from a position of weakness. I set down my own fork, my appetite disappearing. And will it? Nathan's smile was cold and sharp. Vincent has fundamentally misunderstood who he's dealing with. I don't negotiate from positions of weakness because I don't allow myself to be in those positions. He reached across the table to take my hand. But his miscalculation has accelerated my timeline for certain. Changes. What kind of changes? Nathan was quiet for a long moment, studying our intertwined fingers as if they held answers to complex questions. I've been in talks with certain federal authorities, discussions about cooperation, about providing information in exchange for amnesty for past activities. The words hit me like ice water. Nathan Salvatore didn't cooperate with federal authorities. The man I'd known would have died before turning informant, would have seen betraying his associates as the ultimate dishonor. "You're talking about becoming a witness," I said, hardly believing the words as they left my mouth. "I'm talking about becoming a father," Nathan corrected firmly. "About ensuring that my daughter grows up in a world where her father's past doesn't cast shadows over her future." His thumb traced circles on my palm, a gesture that was both soothing and possessive. Vincent's escalation has made it clear that this life has an expiration date. I can either go down fighting, taking you and our daughter with me, or I can choose a different path. The magnitude of what he was suggesting was staggering. Your people will see it as betrayal. Some will, Nathan acknowledged. Others understand that survival sometimes requires adaptation. He lifted my hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to my knuckles. The smart ones have already made their own arrangements. Clean exits, legitimate businesses, new lives far from the organizations that made them wealthy. And the ones who don't understand? Nathan's expression grew dangerous, reminding me exactly why Vincent Torino had made such a catastrophic miscalculation. We'll discover that I didn't build this empire by being sentimental about necessary decisions. The casual way he spoke about what I knew would be violence, betrayal, and the dismantling of relationships that had defined his adult life should have horrified me. Instead, I felt a fierce pride in his willingness to sacrifice everything for our daughter's future. "When?" I asked. "The meeting with federal prosecutors is tomorrow, if we reach an agreement." Nathan paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "Vincent's organization will be dismantled within the week, along with several others who have been problematic recently." The timeline was shockingly fast, but I was beginning to understand the scope of what Nathan had been orchestrating. This wasn't just about neutralizing a single threat. It was about systematically eliminating every obstacle to our daughter's legitimate future. What about the foundation work, the legitimate businesses? We'll continue under new management structures that ensure complete separation from any criminal activities. Nathan's voice grew warmer as he shifted to discussing the future rather than dwelling on the past. "I've been developing partnerships with other philanthropic organizations, creating frameworks for expansion that don't depend on my direct involvement." The conversation was interrupted by Marco's arrival, his usually composed demeanor showing signs of strain. "Excuse me, Mr. Salvatore. There's been a development that requires your immediate attention." Nathan squeezed my hand before releasing it. "What kind of development?" "Vincent's people have made contact. They're requesting a meeting to discuss terms for a peaceful resolution to recent conflicts." Marco's expression suggested he found this development either suspicious or amusing. They seemed to have developed a sudden interest in negotiation. Nathan's smile was predatory. How interesting. I wonder what could have prompted such a change of heart. He stood, pressing a kiss to the top of my head. This shouldn't take long, Bella. Vincent is about to learn that some situations can't be resolved through negotiation. As Nathan left with Marco, I remained in the dining room, processing everything I'd learned. The man I'd fallen in love with was methodically dismantling his criminal empire, burning bridges and eliminating threats to create a clean slate for our family. The scope of his transformation was breathtaking, the risks he was taking enormous. Mrs. Castellano appeared to clear the dinner plates, her movements efficient, but her eyes kind. "He's not the same man you left 2 years ago," she said quietly, echoing Marcus's earlier observation. "No," I agreed. "He's not. That child you're carrying," Mrs. Castellano continued, stacking dishes with practiced precision. "She's already changing him in ways his enemies don't understand, making him more dangerous because he has something pure to protect." I placed my hand on my belly, feeling our daughter's restless movements beneath my palm. She was indeed changing everything, not just Nathan's business empire, but the fundamental calculus of his existence. For the first time since childhood, Nathan Salvatore had something he valued more than power, more than respect, more than his own life. "Mrs. Castellano," I said as she prepared to leave with the dishes. "How dangerous is this transition he's planning?" The older woman paused, her expression growing thoughtful. "Any change involves risk, dear, but staying the same was becoming impossible." She smiled with maternal warmth. "Your Nathan has always been a man who adapts to survive. Now he's adapting to live." Later that evening, I stood in the nursery watching the city lights twinkle below like fallen stars. Somewhere out there, Nathan was meeting with Vincent Torino, negotiating the terms of a conflict that would reshape both their organizations. Tomorrow, he would sit down with federal prosecutors and trade information for immunity, burning the criminal world that had made him wealthy to build a legitimate future for our daughter. The magnitude of his sacrifice was overwhelming. Nathan was giving up everything he'd built, everyone he'd trusted, every relationship that had defined his adult life. He was making himself vulnerable to his enemies, dependent on the protection of a government he'd spent decades circumventing. And he was doing it all for a child who hadn't even been born yet, for a future that existed only in possibility and hope. As I felt our daughter move restlessly inside me, I realized with crystalline clarity that Nathan wasn't just changing for her sake. He was becoming the man I'd always hoped he could be, someone who valued creation over destruction, protection over power, love over fear. The transformation was far from complete, and the path ahead was fraught with dangers I couldn't fully comprehend. But for the first time since I'd discovered his true nature and fled in terror, I found myself looking forward to the future we were building together. A future where our daughter would never have to choose between loving her father and respecting herself. Where Nathan's legacy would be measured not in fear or wealth, but in the good he'd created and the love he'd protected. It was worth the risk. Worth the surrender of my hard-won independence. Worth the moral complexity of loving a man who was systematically destroying his old life to build something worthy of our child. The contractions started at 3 a.m, rippling through my body with an intensity that made me gasp. For a moment, I lay still in the darkness of my room, hoping it was just another false alarm. But when the second contraction came, stronger and more insistent than the first, I knew our daughter had decided it was time to make her entrance into the world. "Nathan," I called out, my voice barely above a whisper. But somehow he was already there, appearing in my doorway as if he'd been waiting for this moment. "It's time?" he asked, moving swiftly to my side, his face alert despite the early hour. I nodded, unable to speak as another wave of pain gripped me. Nathan's hands were gentle but sure as he helped me sit up, his presence both calming and energizing. This was it, the moment that would change everything. that would make us a family in the most fundamental way. Dr. Chen is already on her way, Nathan said, pressing a kiss to my forehead. And the room is prepared. Everything is ready, Bella. The next few hours blurred together in a haze of increasing intensity and anticipation. Dr. Chen arrived within minutes, her equipment and nursing staff transforming one of the penthouse's guest rooms into a fully functional delivery suite. Nathan had spared no expense in creating a space that rivaled any hospital, complete with emergency medical equipment and backup systems. "You're doing beautifully," Dr. Chen said during one of her examinations, her voice warm with encouragement. "Your daughter is strong and healthy, just eager to meet her parents." Nathan never left my side, holding my hand through each contraction, offering water and encouragement. His usually commanding presence softened into something tender and protective. I could see the fear in his eyes, fear for me, for our daughter, for this precious life we'd created together. But his voice remained steady and strong. "She's going to be so loved," he whispered during a brief respite between contractions. "So protected. She'll never want for anything, never have to be afraid." As the morning wore on, the contractions intensified, and I found myself gripping Nathan's hand with desperate strength. The pain was overwhelming, but with it came an anticipation so fierce it took my breath away. Soon, very soon, I would hold our daughter. Soon, the abstract concept of motherhood would become reality. "I can see her head," Dr. Chen announced, her voice filled with excitement. "Just a few more pushes, Isabella. She's almost here." The final moments were a blur of effort and overwhelming sensation. My entire world narrowed to the task of bringing our daughter safely into existence. Nathan's voice was a constant anchor, encouraging and supporting, his love for both of us radiating like heat. And then, with one final push, she was here. Our daughter's first cry filled the room, strong and indignant, and absolutely perfect. Dr. Chen placed her on my chest. This tiny miracle with a shock of dark hair and perfect miniature features that were unmistakably Salvatore. "She's beautiful," Nathan whispered, his voice thick with emotion I'd never heard from him before. "Perfect." I looked up to see tears streaming down his face. This man who commanded an empire through fear and force, who had enemies willing to kill him, who had essentially reconstructed his entire life for this moment, completely undone by 7 pounds of new life. "Would you like to hold your daughter?" I asked softly, though the answer was written clearly on his face. Nathan's hands trembled slightly as he accepted the bundle, cradling her with infinite care as if she were made of spun glass. "Hello, little one," he murmured, his voice breaking with wonder. "I'm your father." Our daughter opened her eyes then, dark like Nathan's, and seemed to study his face with the serious concentration of someone meeting a person of great importance. The moment stretched between them, father and daughter seeing each other for the first time, and I knew with absolute certainty that Nathan's transformation was complete and irreversible. "What should we call her?" I asked, though we'd discussed names endlessly over the past weeks. "Aria," Nathan said without hesitation, his eyes never leaving our daughter's face. "Aria Isabella Salvatore." He looked up at me, his expression radiant. Strong enough to face whatever comes, beautiful enough to change the world. The name was perfect, musical and strong, carrying echoes of both our heritages, while promising a future entirely her own. Aria Isabella Salvatore, a name that would open doors, command respect, and carry the weight of her father's redemption. Dr. Chen and her team completed their work efficiently, ensuring both Aria and I were healthy and stable before beginning their departure. "I'll be back tomorrow for follow-up examinations," she promised. "But everything looks absolutely perfect. You have a very healthy, very beautiful daughter." As the medical team left, Nathan and I found ourselves alone with our daughter for the first time. The magnitude of the moment was overwhelming. We were parents now, responsible for this perfect little life that depended on us for everything. "She's going to grow up safe," Nathan said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of a solemn vow. "Protected, loved. She'll never know the kind of fear you lived with, the kind of choices I had to make to survive." I believed him completely. The federal cooperation agreement had been finalized 3 days earlier, with Nathan providing information that would dismantle 5 criminal organizations, including Vincent Torino's. In exchange, he'd received complete immunity for past activities and witness protection for our family. We would be leaving the city within the month, relocating to a place where Nathan's enemies couldn't find us, where Arya could grow up without the shadows of her father's past life. "What will you miss most?" I asked, watching as he gently rocked our daughter. Nathan considered the question seriously. "Nothing," he said finally. "Everything that mattered to me is right here in this room." He looked up at me, his expression fierce with protective love. "I spent 20 years building an empire, accumulating power and wealth and respect. But none of it means anything compared to this moment. The transformation was complete. Nathan Salvatore, the man who had once valued control above everything else, had surrendered his entire world for the chance to be the father Arya deserved. He'd betrayed former allies, abandoned criminal enterprises, and accepted the protection of federal authorities, all for a child who had been born just hours ago. "Do you have any regrets?" I asked. Nathan's smile was soft and certain. "Only that it took me so long to understand what really mattered." He stood carefully, still cradling Arya, and moved to the window that overlooked the city where he'd once ruled from the shadows. "Look at your kingdom, little princess," he whispered to our daughter. "Someday you'll change it in ways your father never could." As I watched Nathan with our daughter, I realized that my own transformation was complete as well. The woman who had fled in terror 2 years ago no longer existed. In her place was someone stronger, someone who understood that love sometimes required impossible choices, that safety was worth more than independence, that redemption was possible even for those who seemed irredeemable. "I love you," I said, the words carrying the weight of everything we'd been through, everything we'd sacrificed, everything we'd built together. Nathan turned from the window, our daughter still cradled in his arms, his eyes bright with unshed tears. "I love you both," he replied. "More than power, more than wealth, more than my own life." The future stretched ahead of us, uncertain but full of promise. We would leave this penthouse, this city, this life behind, and build something new in a place where Arya could grow up free from the shadows of her father's past. Nathan would continue his foundation work under a new identity, channeling his skills and resources into legitimate enterprises that would benefit the world rather than exploit it. But most importantly, Arya would grow up knowing she was loved completely, protected absolutely, and valued for who she was rather than what she represented. She would never have to choose between loving her father and respecting herself. Never have to flee in the night from the very person who was supposed to keep her safe. As the sun rose over the city, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, I held my daughter while Nathan made the final arrangements for our new life. Vincent Torino was dead, killed in federal custody before he could reveal information that might have implicated others. Nathan's former associates had either fled the country or accepted plea agreements of their own. The criminal empire that had made Nathan wealthy and powerful was being systematically dismantled, its assets seized and redistributed. In its place was rising something far more valuable, a family built on love and sacrifice, protected by legal rather than illegal means, dedicated to creation rather than destruction. Nathan had traded his crown for his soul, and in doing so, had given our daughter a future without limits. The cycle was broken. The legacy would be love, not fear. And Arya Isabella Salvatore would grow up to change the world in ways her father never imagined possible.